The text that we have still not started yet is Samuel Johnson's London. So before I start that text, I'm going to do some preliminary discussions. So basically, I'll be talking about the background about the text. So those backgrounds will include a little bit about the author, some information about the author, and also about the genre in which he was writing. And to be more particular, we'll also have some discussions about the age in which he was writing, so that you have some background information, some idea about the type of context in which he was writing, right? So yeah, one more thing that I must say before I begin is, since this is a new method, we have already tried Zoom once, and like I said, that we are not going to continue with that for now. Please let me know how this goes with you, right? This particular way in which I'll be sending you video lectures. Let me know how this goes with you, right? If you face any problems, let me know. So yeah, let's begin. So the first thing that I want to talk about, before getting into the specifics of the poem London, is a discussion about classicism and romanticism. Now, I have already mentioned some of the aspects of classicism and romanticism in our classes on both Frankenstein and Thomas Gray. So you probably have some idea. Today, we are going to take a more organized look, right? We are going to take a more methodical approach. In the previous classes, both on Frankenstein and again during the lectures on Thomas Gray, the approach was not methodical. I just dropped in a few points in context of the particular text that we were doing, right? So today we are going to take a methodical approach and see what is classicism and how are we going to say it. We are going to try to see classicism in terms of how it is different from romanticism, right? See, remember, difference is one of the easiest way to see things, right? It certainly is not the best way, but at this stage, I'll only try to show you classicism in terms of its difference from romanticism, right? So we will see one in terms of the other. But yes, as literature students, you must be aware that while seeing something in terms of its difference from other things may be easy, it is definitely not the best way of seeing things. Seeing in terms of difference, you will get to understand some basic things, but you will also lose out in a lot of information. You will also lose out in a lot of nuances, right? But for our introductory class, I'm going to take the difference approach anyway. So let's begin. There are two major tendencies in any literature, in any language: classical and romantic. This is something I have mentioned previously. Always remember that in any literature, in any language, whichever region in the world you might consider, definitely in English language, definitely, in English literature, there are two tendencies, two competing tendencies. One is the classical tendency, one is the romantic tendency. Tendency by whom? Tendency by the authors to either follow one pattern, that is the romantic pattern, or the classical pattern. Okay, the framework, I mean. So at any period in the history of literature, whichever language or whichever region it may be, one of these tendencies will dominate, right? It's either the classical or the romantic which will dominate at any one point in time. And then this will be followed by the dominance of the other tendency. And in this manner, they will appear alternatively, one following the other, right? Now, why am I so confident that this will happen and that one will follow the other? Well, it's think of it as historical data. Think of it as historical evidence. Historically, we have noticed that in a lot of literatures across the world, definitely in English literature, certainly in English literature, that first there's a classical period, and then there's a romantic period, and then there's again a classical period. One competing with the other, one reacting against the other. These two occur one after the other, right? That's the first thing. Now, classicism and romanticisms are both artistic movements that have influenced the literature, the visual art, the music, the architecture over many centuries. Okay, of all the literatures that I have told you to consider, right? It could be French literature, English literature, Bengali, Hindi, Urdu, any literature in any part of the world, right? So the influence of both classicism and romanticism are not restricted to literature, okay, as in written literature, as in essay, novel writing, poetry, okay. They also extend their influence. The tendencies of both classicism and romanticism are seen not only in literature but in visual art, which includes paintings and even film, then music, architecture, and all other kinds of art, basically. So the influence of these tendencies are felt much beyond literature. Believe it or not, the tendencies of both classicism and romanticism are even felt in the sciences, right? So you might wonder how, right? So I'm not going to get into detail today, but yeah, try to keep this information in mind, that the tendencies of classicism, romanticism, these are not simply restricted to literature. They're not even restricted to just art. They also spread their influence in other domains, in sciences as well. So maybe in another class we'll talk about how it influences science, and maybe because it is very interesting to observe how romanticism is present even in the sciences. Alright, so for now we'll just focus on the terms. Now the term classicism refers to the admiration and imitation of Greek and Roman literature. Again, I've mentioned this in class before. Classics always refer to, in the Western tradition, classics always refer to Greek and Roman literature, art, and also architecture, right? So order, maturity, harmony, balance, and moderation are the important qualities of classicism. All right, what are the qualities of classicism? There's harmony, right? Balance, maturity, order, discipline, logic, moderation, all of these things. These are all features of classicism. Now, with its origins in ancient Greek and Roman societies, classicism defines beauty as that which demonstrates balance and order. Okay, so well, that might have been a bit difficult for you to understand, so I'll repeat in simpler terms. So basically what I'm trying to say is romanticism and classicism see things differently. Okay, what is one of the major concerns of literature or art? It's beauty. Beauty is one of the central concerns of all kinds of art. So for classicism, beauty is something which is defined by balance and order. Okay, this is a very classical idea. So I'll just give you a detour here. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the name of Aristotle. Excuse me, Aristotle. So in his Poetics, there's a book called Poetics that he wrote, where he tries to define what is beautiful. He tries to understand what is beautiful. Okay, the philosopher Aristotle tries to understand and explain what constitutes beauty, right? And in his definition, he comes up with the idea that something can be called beautiful only if it has harmony, if it has balance, right? If it has a certain order, right? So strictly in classical terms, if you think of a mug or a cup in which you would drink tea, right? Take that example, just imagine a cup in your mind and think of this for a moment. According to Aristotle, a cup could be called beautiful only and only if it had a definite perfect shape. Okay, a slight deviation and then it's not beautiful anymore, right? I hope that's a simple example. You can apply that principle to anything, right? You could apply that principle to clothes that we wear. You could apply that principle to sculpture, to buildings, right? Wherever there is order, wherever there is discipline, harmony, balance, that is beauty, and that is exactly what the classical idea of beauty is. Now next we are going to see how romanticism sees things, right? And obviously we are going to talk about how romanticism sees beauty. So first of all, romanticism might best be described as anti-classicism. Remember at the beginning of this lecture, I told you that we are going to see one in terms of the other. We are going to see how they're different from each other. Okay? So Romanticism may be best described as anti-classicism. Now, this movement, Romanticism stressed human emotion and thoughts and emphasized the individual, the imaginative, and the spontaneous. All right. So even to some extent, perhaps to a great extent, visionaries and transcendentals, right? So these are some of the terms are maybe difficult for you to understand. I'll try and unpack them one after the other. So, well, Romanticism, like I said, emphasized on the individual, right? So in other words, Romanticism was all about subjectivity. It was about feelings of the person who was writing it, and also about the feelings of the persons who were being written about. Okay, so on the one hand, you had the subjectivity of the author, the poet, the novelist. Again, on the other, you had explorations of the deepest emotions of the characters portrayed by those artists, by those novelists, those poets, those painters even, right? Now, in English literature, the most famous movement of Romanticism developed in the 18th century, partially as a reaction against classicism. Now, well, there have been many movements of Romanticism, many romantic movements, but the most famous one, the one with which we are chiefly concerned with, is the one that happened in the 18th century, right, around the time of the French Revolution, and then went on into the 19th century as well, right? So how does this movement, how does Romanticism define beauty? You have already seen that Classicism defines beauty as something that demonstrates beauty and order. Now, the question is, how does Romanticism see beauty? How does Romanticism express beauty? Romanticism, remember this, listen very closely, expresses beauty through imagination and powerful emotions. Okay? So, fundamentally opposite, fundamentally different. Classicism sees beauty in terms of balance and order. Where there is balance, there is beauty. Where there is order and discipline, there is beauty. Romanticism will say no, balance is not that important. What is important is the expression of powerful emotions, passion. All right? Keep that in mind. The name or the term classical was given by the Greeks and Romans, given to the Greeks and Romans by the Renaissance artists. This is again something I may have mentioned fleetingly in class, Renaissance. So in terms of its history, you may probably be aware of what the term means. Renaissance refers to a movement that roughly happened in the 14th, 15th centuries when a great number of discoveries were made, right? Renaissance was the time when Vasco da Gama discovered India, when Columbus discovered America, right? And this is also the time when Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, even Shakespeare, all these characters were alive, and when all these people performed their arts, right? So that's the Renaissance, and the term classical only came into existence during the Renaissance. Okay, so basically during the Renaissance, during the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries, artists started to think of the Greek and Roman art as classical. Okay, they were like, whatever the Greeks have done, that is a classic. Whatever the Romans have done, that is a classic. And in respect to that, the Renaissance artists tried to revive similar things, right? So one task I would like you to do here is find out what the word classic means, right? See, we usually express the word classic a lot in everyday speech, right? We refer to a movie saying that this movie is a classic. We refer to songs as being classics, right? So one task for you is to find out what the word classic means. Try also to find out what it particularly means in literature. I have given you a hint, right? I have introduced you to the idea. So your task is to go on and expand your knowledge a little bit, right? So artists and thinkers of the Renaissance, they saw themselves as the heirs of the world following the Middle Ages, right? Now again, I'm referring to one more age, the Middle Ages. Middle Ages is just before the Renaissance. Okay, Middle Ages was a time when there was no significant learning or no significant art, right? So it is often referred to as the Dark Ages, right? So the Renaissance people, the Renaissance artists, writers, explorers, all of these people, they wanted to break away from the Middle Ages. And how did they break away? They thought the easiest way, the best way to break away from this dark age was to take inspiration from the classics. That is, like I just mentioned, from the Greek and Roman traditions. All right. So the Romans and Greek traditions, which had kind of lost themselves in the Dark Ages, during the Dark Ages, they found their way back during the Renaissance, right? So I'll just fleetingly refer to one of the, like not one, I'll refer to a few Renaissance poets who greatly influenced English literature. One is Dante, the other is Petrarch. Okay, so you probably are familiar with these names anyway, but remember that these are very significant figures who wrote during the Renaissance, who took great inspiration, a great deal of inspiration from classical literature, and then they imitated those styles. And their styles, the styles of Dante and Petrarch, were again imitated by other artists across Europe, in France and also in England, which is where the literature we will study is from. So the ideals of the classical or the neoclassical period continued to have a very strong influence into the age of the Enlightenment. Okay, Age of the Enlightenment is one of the terms you need to be familiar with, and the second task, the first task was to find out what classic means. The second task for you will be to find out what the age of the Enlightenment refers to. Now this is again something I have referred to sometimes in class, but very fleetingly. Now we are going to look at it in a more organized manner, right? So have these terms in mind. What is a classic? What is enlightenment? Right? Now remember, I'll just give you another hint. This enlightenment is not the kind of enlightenment that Buddha is known to have. Understood? It's not like someone sat under a tree and then saw light. Okay, saw a sudden glimmer of light and had a great deal of knowledge at that moment. No, this is a different kind of enlightenment. Your task will be to find out what the term age of enlightenment refers to. It is also known by some other names, such as age of reason, right? It is also called the neoclassical age. These are just terms which are sometimes used interchangeably, right? So I've given you some hint. Find out what the age of enlightenment refers to. So I guess I'll stop here. In the next class, we'll pick up from here, and we will continue our discussion into what classical and romantic is. We'll look at some specific features, some specific structures, and remember, all of this background information that I'm giving you will serve as the foundation, okay, to your learning of Samuel Johnson in this case in particular, but also to other literatures that you are studying right now, okay, even to Frankenstein and even to Thomas Gray's poems that you have already read, which is why I had fleetingly mentioned them, but I guess I should have done this earlier, had this discussion earlier, but never mind. So keep the tasks in mind, try to find out those meanings of those terms, and we'll pick up in our next video lecture from here. All right, stay safe.